Hello, welcome to Flagman's presentations virtually during this pandemic. Many of you may have seen a Flagman presentation in person, but we're going to try and bring this to you without any risk and hope again that you enjoyed it. I'm going to, because we are in a safe environment, I'm going to be able to take off my mask, and I think that will help with hearing as well. So Time Magazine is what we're going to be talking about today. Very familiar to us with its masthead that have very recognizable. Many of us were grown up expecting Time Magazine to arrive in the mail. I would guess, though, that there are very few of us who would have been able to read the very first issue of Time Magazine in 1928. That's, I think, a pretty good guess on my part. Time Magazine, over the years, has nominated a Man of the Year initially. Since then, they have opted to change that to Person of the Year to recognize an individual who, for the most part, has influenced favorably mankind. There have been occasions, though, then when the person nominated was in fact not positively influential, but in fact was there because of his notoriety. So Time Magazine has, again, was very familiar each of their years with regards to American presidents. That's automatic. When the president is elected, they in fact become Time Magazine's Person of the Year. So we have an example here of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who on 3 separate occasions was Time Magazine's Person of the Year. If not individuals, then there are oftentimes, especially recently, groups of people, multiple award nominees. So we have an example here of American presidents. Many of these photos, I think, are quite familiar to you. We can pick out some of the more recent American presidents. Also, women, and this was, I think, promoted the change to Person of the Year, have in fact graced the cover of Time Magazine as their Person of the Year. So we'll take a look at who those individual ladies in fact were as we go through. We're not going to look at each year. We've been rather selective because we want to talk about the flags that in fact help us tell the story of that individual. So here we have an example of Time Magazine's Men of the Year, in this case recognizing the peacemakers that favored mankind positively through that given year. And popes have in fact graced the cover of Time Magazine and have been recognized as, in this case, Man of the Year. This was an indication of a year when Time produced 4 different covers to suggest that there were in fact 4 different groups of people who contributed to mankind. So we begin with 1928, recognizing that in 1927, the American aviator Charles Lindbergh made the first transatlantic non-stop flight from the United States to France. So in that case, we would use, I think, the flag that would have been flown at his departure in New York City on Long Island, the American flag here with 48 stars in 1928. And when he arrived in France after the flight, the flag of France would have been flying in celebration of that particular achievement. This was the original cover showing Lindbergh in 1928, and the plane, the Spirit of St. Louis, is, of course, the plane that gained fame not only for the aviator, but for the plane itself. Arriving in Paris, at the Paris airport, and a photograph here of the reception that Lindbergh received, and a global hero for this achievement. So in 1930, we look at an individual who several years later was not there to witness his achievement of Indian independence, but Mahatma Gandhi was Time Magazine's Person of the Year for his role in seeking the independence of India from the British Empire. And so we have the flag of the Indian independence movement, led principally by Gandhi. The famous photograph, and in prison, in a British prison in India, Gandhi spent his time profitably because he felt that if the Indian people were able to produce their own textiles, then they would no longer be dependent on Britain, which was a step toward independence. And so this machine that he used to develop his own cloth, called the chakra, is also the one that we see as a symbol on the flag of the Indian Congress. He also believed, too, that if the Indian people were able to produce their own salt, again, they would not have to be dependent on seasoning like that from the British Empire. But here we have a statement: the chakra is the symbol of nonviolence on which all life, if it is to be real life, must be based. And the march to the sea to gather salt is a peaceful, nonviolent march that, in fact, became synonymous with Gandhi. And here, with the ultimate president of India, the newly independent India in 1948, Nehru, Gandhi, of course, was assassinated prior to Indian independence, so he did not witness achievement. 1935, the Time Magazine's Person of the Year from Ethiopia, Haile Selassie was the emperor, who, according to Time, showed exceptional patience and resilience in the face of an Italian occupation of Ethiopia for the resources of Ethiopia, included in all of North Africa. Italy was trying to achieve an empire that stretched through all the countries in North Africa, including Selassie's Ethiopia. So the flag of Ethiopia at the time, with the Lion of Judah, we have here. The photograph of the emperor, and very interesting flag. Similar to the national flag, but this is the flag of the emperor, and the two sides. We can see the Lion of Judah on the one side, but on the reverse, we can see that the symbol here is that of St. George, which is of interest because we tend to think St. George being associated with England. But in fact, St. George as a symbol is almost universal. There are many, many countries and cities that have used St. George as their patron saint. Here we have Ethiopia, Lion of Judah, and a close-up here of the George symbol fighting the dragon. The Italian occupation in the early 1930s, these are Italian troops invading Ethiopia. And here we can see the Selassie took refuge as an exile in Jerusalem. And interestingly, upon his return after the Italian occupation, he ran into some difficulties into the 1960s when a military coup ousted him from power. And here we have the ignominy of being removed from office, transported to where he was being held, and ultimately killed in a Volkswagen. 1936, the Time magazine's Person of the Year, in this case, the very first lady, is the bride of the King of England. And of course, that can't occur at the same time. You can't be King of England and marry an American divorcee. In this case, Wallis Simpson became the bride of Edward VIII. Here we have her. And the flag that would best represent Wallis Simpson is the flag of the United Kingdom, because the marriage of Wallis Simpson to King Edward resulted or caused the abdication of the king. And so his younger brother, George, had to assume the throne of the United Kingdom. This is Edward and the couple. But we turn to 1937. And now we're talking about just prior to, and probably causing a great deal of what happened later, World War II. So this is just before the outbreak of World War II. And Time magazine's Person of the Year was, in fact, a couple. And these are the rulers of nationalist China, Chiang Kai-shek and his wife. And 1937, they were very much involved in thwarting Japanese aggression. So for that reason, they became Time magazine's Persons of the Year. And so the flag of nationalist China, with its symbolic sun, we have here. The photograph of Chiang Kai-shek, and to indicate just how significant the Allied powers considered Chinese involvement in the being against Japanese aggression, we can see that the Chiang Kai-sheks are at the conference. I think we could recognize Churchill and Roosevelt. And the symbol of nationalist China takes us to 1938, and Time magazine's Person of the Year. We can see they don't have an actual photograph of this individual, but they have an animation or a graphic to represent, in this case, Adolf Hitler. And again, Time magazine has, I think, the very first example of somebody who they felt was a notorious, somebody who did not contribute positively to mankind or global peace. In fact, just the opposite. So we have Hitler. And the graphic, a little bit in more detail, shows us that at the very bottom, we have a character who is playing some sort of an instrument, like an organ. But that instrument, in fact, is driven in such a way as it makes this carousel put in motion. And that carousel, of course, represents the Holocaust and the German attitude, the Nazi attitude toward the German populace at the time. So the flag of Nazi Germany would be most appropriate to represent Adolf Hitler. Very much supported by the population, and in this case, a photograph of the example of the Holocaust, final solution. 1939, again, just before the outbreak of World War II, and we have Time magazine with Joseph Stalin, the ruler of communist China, communist Soviet Union, which had its beginnings at the end of World War I. But by the time of 1939, Stalin and the Soviet Union, the communists were very much in power in the Soviet Union. In 1942, also Joseph Stalin. So we have an example of a multiple winner in this case, several years after. Might suggest that at the outset of World War II, Stalin had allied the Soviet Union with Nazi Germany. But during the duration of the war, he reconfigured his alliance and became part of the Allies. And so this is now, I think, Stalin part of the Allied bloc, Hitler's advances. Stalin and the Soviet flag, and in this case with Lenin, who was the architect of the Soviet Union. And here the toast between the German delegate and the Soviets. They made a pact at the outset of World War II. And Stalingrad, where Hitler's advances were. And here we have Stalin with the other Allied powers, again, Churchill and Roosevelt. 1940, Time Magazine's Person of the Year is the leader of the United Kingdom. This is Winston Churchill with his very familiar top hat, in this case without the cigar. But Churchill, leader of the British Empire. And in 1949, Churchill, again, a multiple winner, in this case because of his leadership during World War II. And we have the famous photograph and the very famous statement. Churchill, never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. Here he's referring to the Royal Air Force and the Battle of Britain. Churchill and the flag of the United Kingdom and the famous V for Victory, and takes us to 1944, again during the heat of World War II, and we have the ultimately the American president, but in 1944, leader of the Allied forces in Europe. This is Dwight D. Eisenhower, and again the 48 starred American flag, the stars and stripes. Eisenhower leading the Allied contingent in Europe. This is the invasion of Sicily, and then the march up Italy to ultimately take Rome. In 1951, Time Magazine's Person of the Year is the ruler of Iran, or in this case, Persia, and chosen by Time because of his stance against the Western powers, principally the United States and the United Kingdom, who had corporate interests in the Persian oil, the oil fields in Iran. And the position taken by the ruler was that the resources should belong to Iran, so he nationalized the oil industry. And so this was Mossadegh, and the flag of Persia, or Iran, we have here. And a graphic. The Persian people were very supportive of this stand against Western interests, indicating a cartoon, the nationalization of the oil industry. and takes us to 1952 with the coronation of the new monarch of the United Kingdom as a result of the death of her father, George. The Princess Elizabeth is Time Magazine's Person of the Year. And she becomes, the death of her father, the leader of the British Empire, which she, during her initial phase of her reign, which we know continues to this day, was very much a supporter of a transition from the empire to the Commonwealth. And the news of her father's death was transmitted to her while she was on a royal tour of East Africa, in particular Kenya. And so at the same time that she's being welcomed during that tour, she's also going to be notified that she, in fact, is the monarch designate. The death of her. Arriving back in London as Queen Elizabeth. And yet it took almost a year between the death of her father and the coronation because of all the preparations that in fact had to be done. But this is the photograph of the coronation. 1957 takes us to yet another Soviet leader. This is Nikita Khrushchev. And the Soviet flag, of course, has not changed from the days of Lenin and Stalin through to Khrushchev. Well, Khrushchev, of course, was very much involved in a space race with the United States, but also came into conflict with the American President Kennedy. And that resulted in accusations back and forth because of the Soviet placement of missiles in Cuba. But at the same time, the Americans had missiles in Turkey. So it was a matter of how was this going to be resolved. And so we have here Khrushchev and his ally Fidel Castro in Cuba. Photograph of the reconnaissance Americans had conducted to determine that indeed there were Soviet missiles in Cuba. And the parade in Moscow, and ultimately negotiations with. At the United Nations, Khrushchev famously took off his shoe and tried to make his point by banging his shoe on the desk. I'm so sure the lady beside him was impressed with that. And of course, the Soviets not first to land on the moon, but prior to that were well ahead in the space race. So the Americans had to very quickly during the late 60s. 1958, Charles de Gaulle, who was the leader of the French forces during the Nazi occupation of France during World War II. And so the best example of a flag for de Gaulle would be the flag of the Free French forces during World War II. This is the Cross of Lorraine, which the French forces who opposed the Nazis chose as their symbol. The photograph of General de Gaulle, the Cross of Lorraine, and a photograph of the railway car that was used in 1919 for the Germans to sign the Declaration of Surrender. By the Western Allies insisted on that happening. And the interesting thing about the railway car, it was in a museum until Hitler directed that it be removed from the museum, brought on tracks to the exact location where the Germans were made to surrender in World War I, so that the French would have to sign the same kind of surrender 20 years in the same railway car. The liberation of Paris in 1945. de Gaulle in the Arc de Triomphe, and the symbol of the French Republic. De Gaulle made some rather influential visits throughout the world, but especially to Canada, at a time when there was a movement toward separation of Quebec from Canada. De Gaulle, very famous speech, Vive le Québec libre, which didn't go over very well in Ottawa. Examining troops, French troops that were on their way to Algeria to fight in the colonial war. In 1963, takes us to 5 years prior to his assassination. Martin Luther King, Dr. King, was Time Magazine's Person of the Year because of his role in the civil rights movement during the 1960s in the United States. And so most of his work was done in the state of Alabama. And so we have here the state flag of Alabama, which I think best represents Martin Luther King's. Specifically, we have the bus strike in Birmingham, where the Black population was doing all kinds of household work for the white population. They had to take public transit there, and so King decided, in again Gandhi-like nonviolent way, that they would simply not use public transit and not go to those workplaces. And so that's why they made their case, wanted civil rights equal to the rights in the American South. The Southern Conference, Leadership Conference, Southern Christian Leadership Conference was the organization that Dr. King led. And here, the famous photograph of the March on Washington, where King gave the very famous "We Shall Overcome" speech. Here we have a photograph of that. And during the speech, which he had scripted, but at one point he had shared prior to the march that he did have a dream. So there was a lady beside him who said, Dr. King, tell them about your dream. So midway through his speech, he entered the narration about the dream. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream. And this is the photograph during that speech. And almost here to see that. And the march in Selma. And the assassination in Memphis. 1974, we take a look at yet another controversial figure for oil. In this case, the man of the year was the King Faisal of Saudi Arabia, who didn't necessarily nationalize oil in Saudi Arabia, but he certainly cut back on OPEC's production, and that, of course, had consequences in the West. We were very dependent on Saudi oil. And so the flag of Saudi Arabia and King Faisal would have been all about the oil crisis. This is King Faisal, and this is a photograph of a gas station in the West, in America, and the sign, of course, indicates that the oil is back. 1977, we're taking a look here at the president of Egypt, who very, very much was part of an attempt at peace with Israel. This is Anwar Sadat, and flag of Egypt. And the symbol of the eagle of Saladin, the president, and part of the peace process led by, in this case, the American president, Jimmy Carter, and a recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize for his effort. And again, many of these individuals have in fact been victims of assassinations for Anwar Sadat. 1978, we're looking here at the leader of Communist China. And this is after the significant Chinese leader Mao Zedong. This is Deng, who tried to modify a lot of the very strict doctrine of the Red Book of Mao. This is the flag of Communist China. 1985, again, Deng is the man of the year for his efforts at readjusting the Chinese economy to become a world force. Part of Mao's troops, the symbol of Communist China, and of course, leader during the event called Tiananmen Square, student protest. Here we have the student in great contrast with the armored tanks. The photograph is a little misleading because there were thousands of students in Tiananmen Square that day. The photograph seems to suggest that it was just one individual. Many, and many casualties. 1979, again, a leader from Iran, in this case, the leader who replaced the Shah, who was the choice of the West. This is the religious leader, Ayatollah Khomeini. And Khomeini, the leader of Iran. Again, religious rather than secular. And his arrival as the Shah is put into exile, the Ayatollah arrives. The symbol of Iran and the statement to the people, very much supported by the Iranian people. Takes us to 1981. And the achievement of a Polish labor leader, Lech Walesa, in establishing within a communist bloc. It was actually the first labor union that occurred during the Soviet Iron Curtain, and Walesa leading the dock workers at Gdansk in Poland. Ultimately, he becomes the president. So the flag of the Solidarity Labor Union, which is very much the flag of Poland, with the statement Solidarity inscribed on it. Walesa and a very familiar symbolic statement, and his leadership at the Gdansk dock work. And in 1986, Time Magazine's Person of the Year, again, is a lady. In this case, notice the statement Woman of the Year. So this is the president, the newly elected president of the Philippines, Corazon Aquino, and she replaced the dictator Marcos. And Mrs. Marcos is the figure who had the extensive shoe collection. Well, I think Aquino would have made a point of limiting the number of shoes that he in fact owned. So the flag of the Philippines, we have here. Symbol of the Philippines, and a figure who brought about progressive elements to Philippine culture. Takes us to 1987, and Time Magazine again is a Soviet leader This is the president of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, who Time recognizes as Man of the Year because he brought about the change to Soviet society. The change was so drastic that it brought about the demise of the Soviet Union, which led to the advent of Russia. So this is a transition figure from the Soviet Union to Russia. And so this would have been the last ruler to have the flag of the Soviet Union. In 1989, again, multiple winner, because this is the year of the demise of the Berlin Wall, which was symbolic of Soviet rule in Europe, and of course in the Soviet Union. And the coming down of the Berlin Wall. To 2007. Oh, here we're looking at the first president of Russia after the Soviet Union, which is interesting because this is 2007. We're looking at 2020. Putin remains the president of Russia. And so through successive terms where he has altered the constitution, he can remain in power. Here we have the cover in 2007 of Time's Person Year. And the flag of the Soviet Union then is replaced with the traditional flag of Russia. And on the world stage here with Obama, the American president, very much tried to put Russia in the spotlight, and so hosted the Winter Olympics in 2014 at Sochi, and the World Cup of football, soccer, within the last year or two. Takes us to 2015, and yet another lady, Person of the Year, is the Chancellor of Germany. In this case, we're looking at Angela Merkel. And although we have the flag of Germany to best represent Merkel's work, the flag of the European Community, European Council, would probably be equally representative of Merkel's. This is the flag of her political party, Christian Democratic Union, with Putin, and here as president of the European Union. Interesting flag because we know recently that the United Kingdom has left the European Union with Brexit, but the number of stars remained unchanged, despite the UK's dismissal. In 2019, this is last year, we have the efforts of a very young lady from Sweden, Greta Thunberg, and her drive toward an increased recognition, awareness of global warming and climate change. So she single-handedly started with her own school as a young student, which then went beyond Sweden and ultimately took her on a world tour, which brought out great crowds in protest and supporting the need for the change to our environment. Takes us to this year, 2020. And the question is, who will Time Magazine decide to honor as their Person of the Year? There were, up until just the other day when the winners were announced, several finalists, one of whom would have been the President of the United States prior to his election loss, Donald Trump, who was Time Magazine's Person of the Year in 2016 upon his upset election. but also was a finalist for 2020 because of probably the loss of his election and his refusal to admit that loss, as well as denying the evidence of COVID-19. Also, the Black Lives Matter movement was determined to be a finalist, as well as the frontline health workers in the pandemic were also considered for the winner. But the actual choice of Time Magazine in 2020 was the election of President-elect Biden, and his running mate, Kamala Harris, Senator of California. And so we have the election win by Biden, the Democratic nomination candidates, and their victory celebration. So Time Magazine's Persons of the Year in 2020 is American President-elect Joe Biden and his Vice President, Kamala Harris. And that, I think, takes us right up to date. It's been quite a trip from 1928 through to 2020. But I'm hoping that you enjoyed this. This is the first of a series, I'm hoping, of virtual presentations by the Flagman, which will take the effect of what we've done in person, we can now do through technology. Thanks for your attention. See you next time.